Hi, it's Rich Tehrani here. We're in the TMC newsroom. We are at Interop 2010 in Las Vegas. On our program today is Gavin, who is the VP of Marketing for ShoreTel. Kevin, how are you?
Very good, Rich.
Thanks for being here on the program.
Glad to be here.
Now, you've got some really interesting news that I wanted to talk with you about. Could you tell us what you recently announced?
Yeah, well, we recently announced a total cost of ownership guarantee, the lowest total cost of ownership. For a long time, we've known that the total cost of ownership of a PBX turns out to be 25% upfront cost and 75% ongoing management and maintenance costs. We're learning, and what IT executives are increasingly aware of, is the fact that complexity costs money, and that over time, very complex systems that are hard to administer, take a lot of staff, end up costing an awful lot of money. So the right way to evaluate a PBX or a business communication system is not just the upfront cost, but the total cost of ownership over time. And so we've instituted a guaranteed lowest total cost of ownership because we're confident that the simplicity of the ShoreTel system is significantly less expensive to manage and administer over time.
And this is really a unique offer. Can you tell us a little bit about what the specifics are in terms of what does the guarantee entail, and what does a customer, what can they expect to get if they're not, if they don't feel that they've met that guarantee, or you've met that guarantee?
First of all, we've created a TCO tool, and it's an unlocked spreadsheet that allows and helps the customer to evaluate accurately the total cost over time. So it takes into consideration maintenance, management, upgrades, moves, adds, and changes, and other costs associated with power consumption, as well as the upfront costs. And so we ask the customer to put in the data, the accurate data on ShoreTel and our costs, and also the competitors and their costs. And we have independent third-party research that validates our assumptions, and customers can go in and change those assumptions based on other valid third-party research. And then the tool calculates internal rate of return and break-even analysis and does some financial analysis, charts and graphs, and shows the total cost of ownership. And invariably, as long as it's true, which it is that the simplicity of the ShoreTel system has significantly lower ongoing costs, then our total cost of ownership is always lower. And so we decided to put our money where our mouth is and say, hey, the total cost of ownership of ShoreTel is ever proven to be higher than the total cost of ownership of one of our major competitors, then we will go back and we will decrease the upfront price to the customer and beat the competition by $1. So the truth is we don't really expect to have to do that very often, because when people use the tool, when they do a fair evaluation of the actual costs, invariably the ShoreTel system comes out less expensive.
And I think it's also a great exercise for companies to do before they purchase any piece of product that they're going to be living with for a long time, to really try to figure out over the course of many years, what is it going to cost them? And this almost forces them in some ways to do that ahead of time, where they look at that spreadsheet and they just get a sense of where they're going to be, so they can budget, forecasts, et cetera, right?
Exactly. I think increasingly sort of enlightened companies, enlightened IT shops have been focusing on total cost of ownership more and more, but it's pretty tempting to look at an RFP and look at that upfront cost, and somebody might be 10% higher or 10% lower. And really it is important to consider the total cost over time. And this does help people to really consider what those other costs are. Even things like power consumption is something that does cost money over time, and the lower power consumption system costs less. And so it really is important to take that into consideration and to really be thoughtful about the long-term total costs.
Now, what are you seeing in the market in the last 3-4 months? Have you seen any change?
Well, certainly the market's coming back nicely. I mean, for a little while there, folks were really kind of keeping their wallets closed and being very, very cautious. I think unified communications and business communication systems was a little bit recession resistant, but nonetheless, when the market and IT spending was down so substantially, certainly the market was down, depending on the data. We saw one piece of data says the market was down 19% in 09, and we grew 5% in 09. So
wow.
Our growth rate was much lower than it used to be. We used to be growing at 30-40% per year, and now it dropped down to 5%. But in a down market, that's capturing share, and we're definitely seeing a much, much stronger market now and going forward.
And I mentioned to you off camera that I've been hearing your name from the competition a lot more than I've ever heard it.
Yeah, so that's flattering.
Yeah, it's whatever you're doing, it seems to be getting them to talk about you to me, which is unusual. Most companies don't like to mention their competition.
I think the issue is this complexity. It comes back to it. Complexity costs money, And we're shining this bright light of truth on the fact that complexity doesn't have to be that way. And IT shops and businesses do not need to accept complexity. And complexity sort of becomes expected when the 2 or 3 vendors out there are all offering complex solutions. Then you just come to accept complexity. And so our story is, hey, it doesn't really have to be that way. Our system was built from the ground up. It wasn't a bunch of acquisitions, stitching together companies with different management interfaces and complicated way of approaching it. We had from the very beginning, we engineered simplicity into the solution. And so it really is dramatically different. You know, our competitors don't like to acknowledge ShoreTel is necessarily better, but almost everybody acknowledges it's different. It's really different because it was engineered from the beginning as a unified communication solution, not a bunch of acquisitions were stitched together, but a seamless, simple to use. And importantly, it's also important to keep in mind this notion of lower cost doesn't imply lower functionality, right? It doesn't have to be that way. Simplicity doesn't mean simplistic. It means, in ShoreTel's case, very feature-rich, very capable. We never lose deals on capabilities, as we're trying to shift the discussion from just about capabilities, where we're solid, to total cost, where we think we've got a significant competitive advantage.
Well, that's good. Thank you so much for coming on the program and speaking with us today. This was really a pleasure.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate the time. Take care.